Yellowhammer Nation, welcome in. This is Yellowhammer Radio, Superstation 101 WYDE. You can be a part of the program on this Friday edition of Yellowhammer Radio at 866-551-9933. You can also tweet the program. Check us out on Twitter at YHN Radio. So many good things to talk about today. Andrea Tice, welcome into the program. How are you on this Friday?
I am doing well. No more dreams.
Yeah, no more dreams. I had a weird dream last night, and it wrecked my day. I started the day off just really bad. I woke up not feeling well, and then I had this horrible nightmare that literally had me crying. I mean, it was a vivid nightmare. I'm not going to discuss it on the air. I did tell you about it off the air, and it was a doozy. It was a crazy dream. And so I started my day out. It was awful. A friend texted me, and then I couldn't go back to sleep. And it just, I said a nice prayer. God is looking over us today. We're going to have a fantastic show. I am ready to hit the ground running. And let's talk a little healthcare maybe.
Sure.
There's a gentleman that has a one-line bill that is probably the most genius thing I have ever seen on repealing and replacing Obamacare.
Simplicity in Washington, D.C. is an actual work of art these days.
Yes, it certainly is. And ladies and gentlemen, joining us now from Alabama's 5th District, none other than Congressman Mo Brooks. Welcome into Yellowhammer Radio. How are you, Congressman?
I'm doing fine. By the way, I have those similar nightmares. Mine's about repealing Obamacare. What's yours about?
Well, Andrea dreamed about a swimming pool the other night, and we can't figure that one out.
Well, no, I think my co-host accurately interpreted that I'm over my head in politics with all of this healthcare stuff.
The Republican welfare plan is my nightmare. That's it's bait and switch. It's horrible, but keep going.
Amen, right?
So you feel you're in the deep end on that.
It's just unbelievable that the Republican Party is becoming what the Democrats have been for decades, just left-wing socialists on economic issues.
That's exactly what's happening. I mean, I could not agree with you anymore. This healthcare plan, to me personally, Congressman Brooks, I think it was a disaster. That's what my thought process is on this plan. I thought it was a disaster.
Well, it is. Let me give you some examples. We were sent to Washington, D.C., based on a couple of promises. Number one is we were going to repeal Obamacare. Number two, as a result of that repeal, we were going to make health care costs, and in particular, health insurance premiums, more affordable. Well, that's been breached in a major way under, I'm going to call it Ryan Care for lack of a simpler way to describe it.
Sure. Ryan
Care, according to the Congressional Budget Office and the Joint Committee on Taxation, increases health insurance premiums over the next 2 years by roughly 15 to 20% over and above the increases that would normally be expected under Obamacare. Now, that's what the CBO and the Joint Committee on Taxation are telling us as they conduct the financial examination of Ryan Care. And that's not what we told the American people that we were going to do. Now, in fairness, years 3 through 10, if all the underlying assumptions work out right, there might be a stabilization, perhaps even a decline in premiums after we've first been popped with another 15 to 20% in increases over and above Obamacare. And again, that's assuming that those assumptions are accurate. Historically, they have not been.
Our guest is Congressman Mo Brooks. And let me ask you, Congressman, that's a lot of what-ifs, isn't it? That's a lot of what-ifs.
It is. This repeal bill of the House leadership that is somewhat of a bait and switch and somewhat deceptive in that it purports to be a repeal, but it incorporates into the replacement part the bulk of the cost drivers of Obamacare that make it cost prohibitive for the average American family. So I don't agree with that deception. That's why I introduced a real simple, clean bill. It's very, very short, and it just says, look, Obamacare, citing the public statute number, is hereby repealed. All laws repealed by Obamacare are reinstated, which would revert us back to the laws that we had in place in 2009. And let's just for emphasis, in 2009, America had the best health care in the world at a much better price than what we're paying now. That seems like, to me, a good place to go.
It seems like a great place to go. I've been saying this and asking for this for a long time. Why can't we repeal the darn thing? Then we can take a look at healthcare reform. I believe we needed healthcare reform. When Obamacare came out, that was just the wrong type of reform. Let's go back to the way it was. That's what Republicans have been saying all along. We're going to repeal it. Then we will come up with a replacement. And this Ryan Care plan, whatever you want to call it, did the exact opposite. And I was really disappointed. With 7 full years to come up with a plan that's as good as Washington could do, that really bothered me, a hardworking American taxpaying citizen. It ticked me off, Congressman.
Well, it should. It is a despicable bill. It's one of the worst public policy initiatives I've ever seen. And for it to come from House Republican leadership is doubly disappointing. We can do better than that, and there are plenty of things that we could do. But first, we have to understand the role of the federal government vis-a-vis the states.
Congressman
Simplest
Brooks.
Solution. Go ahead.
I wanted to say that you were one of the first to come out when this bill was, being lined up to be voted on, and you called it an entitlement, which is nothing more than government-established programs that, are entrenched. And you called it an entitlement and you didn't want to continue it. And I appreciate you calling it for what it is. We now have Speaker Ryan coming out as of, I think, yesterday on CBS. He was talking in an interview and he said he didn't want government to be involved in health care. How do you explain this discrepancy between him presenting something that essentially was a continuation of Obamacare and entitlements, but saying out publicly he doesn't want government involved? It confused me.
It is inexplicable and it's self-contradictory. You've got a number of different aspects of this bill. The bottom line being that it increases health insurance premiums 15 to 20% over and above Obamacare increases, and it does that over the next couple of years. But then you've also got this huge new welfare program that the Republican Party now will be responsible for.
Right.
It costs initially, the estimated costs are in the neighborhood of $35 billion a year. And basically what it does is it pays directly or indirectly insurance companies for the cost of health insurance. You can imagine the health insurance industry is in love with this bill because you've got a direct transfer of roughly $35 billion to the coffers of insurance companies paid for out of the United States Treasury. And, of course, we taxpayers are the ones that have to come up with the money to pay for that shift. But what that does, if you start looking at the political dynamics of it and you play it out long term, all of a sudden, all these American voters who are self-sufficient, self-reliant, they pay their own way, they do things the right thing in America, they're taking advantage of the opportunities this country has to offer, we're turning them into welfare dependents.
Yep.
Because they're going to have the federal government paying anywhere from around $2,500 on the low side, $2,000, $2,500 on the low side, to $14,000 of their health insurance costs. And once they become welfare dependents, well, how do you think they're going to vote in the general elections going forward? Are they going to vote for free enterprise, or are they going to vote for more welfare?
Definitely more welfare.
Changes the political dynamics in a major way and basically ends the Republican Party as a functioning entity over the long term.
One of the things that the House Freedom Caucus did was hold the line on this, staying conservative, staying true to their convictions and their campaign promises. And you were among those, Congressman Brooks. Are you feeling any negative or positive feedback on that decision?
Well, I'm getting mixed. In my district, I had about 1,800 people ask me to vote against Ryan Care, and about 500 people asked me to vote for it. Mm-hmm. I thought that was noteworthy given that there was a huge media buy in my district. I don't know the total dollar amount, but it was radio, it was TV, and it was robocalls trying to tell people that it's really between Mo Brooks and Donald Trump. Now, that's a false paradigm. It's really between the American people and what's in this legislation. Mm-hmm. But nonetheless, even though, and I suspect that the insurance companies were behind the financing of these media buys, I don't know that. Unfortunately, it's difficult to ascertain who really was putting the money into it. But the bottom line is this: despite all those calls, all that radio, all that TV, trying to make it look like that I was on the opposite side of Donald Trump, it was something like 77% of the people in my district that contacted my office, out of over 2,000 that contacted my office, wanted me to vote no on this legislation rather than yes. And so it was comforting to know that people in my district, at least, were starting to understand better about how bad this piece of legislation is, both short-term with its adverse effect on insurance premiums, and then long-term with its adverse effect on whether we're going to continue to be a country that is based on principles of liberty and freedom.
Our guest is U.S. Representative Mo Brooks from Alabama's 5th Congressional District. And Congressman, I never once saw this as Mo Brooks versus Donald Trump. What you just said makes perfect sense. I saw this as Mo Brooks looking out for his constituency. That's the way I took it.
Well, it's also our country,
right?
Although my constituency is a sub part of that. But this legislation is really bad for our country long term. There are no free rides. And I'll use that as an example. The initial welfare program was Obamacare, right? Okay. And the CBO estimated that it would cost all of its component parts around $800 billion over a 10-year period of time. They had to revise their estimates a short while ago to increase the cost to over $2 trillion over that 10-year period of time, which means that the CBO was off by a factor of 2.5, that the actual cost was about 2.5 times more than what was estimated. And you can bet your bottom dollar that if the Republican welfare plan were to pass, that they also would be off, because the CBO cannot adjust their numbers based on political dynamics. That's not something that they can take into account when they're doing their scoring. But if we make every campaign about who's going to give me more health care and welfare, you can bet your bottom dollar again that the costs are going to go up, because politicians are going to react and promise more free stuff that we don't have the money to pay for.
Congressman Brooks, you stood up and voted against the Ryan Care bill, and then you turned around and offered a solution, a 2-page solution, which we've often said on the show in and of itself is a work of art, that in D.C. you could put it down to 2 pages. So where does that stand in committee and the process of bringing that to a floor vote?
The only way we're going to have a floor vote is this way. The House leadership does not favor a repeal of Obamacare, as you and I and the American people understand the word repeal, okay?
Right.
They then will have to be pushed aside for this to come to the House floor for a vote. And the bill number for your audience is H.R. 1718.
1718.
First thing to do is to get a bunch of co-sponsors so that the House leadership starts to take notice. The second thing to do is to file a discharge petition that forces it past the committee structure and straight to the House floor for a vote. So I'm hopeful that when we get to the point in time where I can file a discharge petition, that we will slowly but surely get the signatures on that petition. I can't do it right now under House rules. I have to wait 30 legislative days. In calendar days, that translates into sometime in late May or June, just depending on how many days we're in session. Mm-hmm. But when that time comes, if we've not addressed the repeal of Obamacare to the satisfaction of the American people, then I'm going to file that discharge petition. At that point, it'll be up to the American people to decide if they really want a repeal of Obamacare. If they do, they contact their congressman. They get enough congressmen to sign that discharge petition. We have a House floor vote, and boom, we repeal it.
All right. Well, we're putting the word out there for people here in Alabama to contact their congressman and get the word out where they want them to stand on that petition. And hopefully we see some movement on that.
I think the majority of Alabamians, they think the plan, the first plan that, was presented and Ryan was pushing, they looked at it and said, this is a bunch of garbage. They don't want that. You look at what Mo Brooks has presented, this is genius. That's what we've all been saying all along. Repeal the darn thing.
It's the first step. It's the most logical.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Congressman Mo Brooks is our guest from Alabama's 5th Congressional District. Congressman, I want to ask you, what do you make of President Donald Trump and his tweets going after the Conservative Freedom Caucus? Well, in a way, it establishes that we are a force to be reckoned with in Washington, D.C. We've hit the radar screen.
Yeah.
In previous years, previous sessions of Congress, the Freedom Caucus was not that notable. We were the ones pushing for border security. We were the ones pushing against unfair trade agreements like the Trans-Pacific Partnership. We were the ones pushing for smaller federal government. Quite frankly, we were the ones that constitute some of the few conservatives left in the United States Congress. Now we're on the radar screen, and it's somewhat paradoxical that Donald Trump is coming after us, because if you look at the overall membership of the House Freedom Caucus, that's probably where 80 to 90% of his congressional support came from. The establishment Republicans were the ones who were attacking Donald Trump, even when he was our nominee.
I know.
Or on the other hand, they weren't willing to help him.
Right.
And so now Donald Trump, I think he's getting bad advice. I wish that he would support what we're trying to do, because when we get to those trade issues, when we get to border security, you go down a long list of issues where it looks like we are perfectly in line with Donald Trump.
Right.
And I hope that he does not unnecessarily alienate some of our members by the kind of personal targeting. And it really shouldn't be personal targeting. You've either got a good bill or a bad bill, and we should be talking about public policy and how to improve a bill. And by way of background, RyanCare has only 17% approval of the American people.
Right.
It's opposed by the Heritage Foundation. It's opposed by FreedomWorks. It's opposed by Club for Growth. Last night on TV, I was watching Sean Hannity. He was against it. Former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, was against it and has been talking about how our killing this bill, assuming that it's dead, our killing this bill has helped save the Republican Party. You also had Laura Ingraham, who's opposed to it.
Yeah.
Virtually all of the conservative think tanks have come out against this legislation once they figure out what it does and how it breaches our promises to the American people.
Absolutely. Representative Mike Rogers, changing the subject for just a moment. Representative Mike Rogers has introduced a bill to fund construction of the wall. And I noticed on your Twitter yesterday, you sent a tweet out saying you fully support President Trump's effort to build that wall and have Mexico pay for it. And then Rogers, the bill that he's introduced is to tax illegal immigrants. Tell us a little bit about that, because you've signed on as a co-sponsor.
I'm very, very thankful that Mike Rogers has introduced this bill. This is a sign of real strong leadership by Congressman Rogers with respect to our border security issue. And basically, there are wire transfers and other transfers of money from illegal aliens in America to people back in their home countries, usually Mexico, but not always. And what Mike Rogers wants to do is to put a tax on those transfers of funds. I think the amount is in 2%, but you're testing my memory in that regard. It might be a little bit more, it might be a little bit less. But that's one way to come up with the money to pay for the wall without it burdening American citizens. It's one way for Donald Trump to keep his promise to make Mexico pay for it. And I'm very thankful that Congressman Mike Rogers from Alabama has taken a leadership role in this, and I'm happy to have had the opportunity to co-sponsor and help him get it passed.
Well, I'm certainly glad that you've co-sponsored that. I think it's fantastic. Here in Alabama, sir, we definitely want that wall. You know that. There's no question.
I'm actually excited and impressed that 2 Alabama congressmen have made initiatives in resolving this problem, Obamacare and the wall, and it speaks well of our state. So keep up the good work, Congressman.
Will do, and thank you so much for the opportunity to be on your show, and also for what y'all do to help the American people better understand what they need to understand in order for our republic to go in the right direction.
Absolutely. Congressman Mo Brooks from Alabama's 5th Congressional District, appreciate you being with us here on Yellowhammer Radio. Look forward to talking to you again very soon, sir.
My pleasure. Y'all have a good one.
You too.
Congressman Mo Brooks with us here on Yellowhammer Radio. A short break. We're right back for this Friday edition.